Welcome to Divine Decode, where truth meets transformation and awareness becomes art. I am your host, Pragya Malviya, and tonight's episode invites us to explore a question that feels urgent in our hyper-curated age. Who are we when we stop performing? Our guest, Alicia, is a licensed professional counselor, somatics facilitator, and transformational retreat host who guides people through the sacred work of unmasking. Her approach it blends psychology, body intelligence, and spiritual integration, reminding us that healing is not about becoming someone new. It's about remembering who we were before the world told us what to be. And thank you for being here, Alicia. I invite you to our podcast, and I'm looking forward for this conversation. It's a pleasure to host you.
Thank you so much, Pragya. I'm looking forward to our conversation as well.
That's great. That's great. Alicia, as I mentioned, unmasking in your introduction too. So this word it resonates profoundly in a culture obsessed with self-presentation, right? So, from your perspective, how do masks form? And it's not just psychologically, but even somatically. How are these formed and how do they affect the society at large, according to you?
Well, I believe in our formative years of development, there are particular tasks in a particular order that need to be mastered, for us to really establish the sense of trust and safety within ourselves, safe enough to relax, to open up and to be our authentic self. And when there's a breakdown in that order of operations, we find ways to help us through, whether they're adaptive or maladaptive. We take on specific defense mechanisms or behavioral demonstrations, or we pick up on habits or absorb the conditioning of those around us. And as the brain begins to develop and continues to develop, as well as the formation of the personality, like these aspects that serve as protective mechanisms, as helpless, independent, small little humans we are, to get us through, to allow us to be part of our tribe, so to speak. So um I think oftentimes we may believe that that this is just how I am, or this is just how I was raised, or this is just what I do, or, for the more unconscious aspects, defense mechanisms or habitual thought patterns that lead us to be in this autopilot mode where we're not really thinking or having the freedom of choice. We're just sort of in a very narrow focus mindset, trying to perform or appear or to prove or to belong or to please or defend or personalize. And it's part of our human predicament. But I believe that when we take the time to use the breath and to use the senses to ground us into the present moment, in these times of stillness where we truly feel like safe and grounded and connected, oriented, it allows us begin to become more or less the observers of these different tendencies or masks that they wear, and to really begin to question, is this functioning for me? Is this helping me? If that makes any sense.
It totally does, and it totally resonates with a lot of things that we discuss in the society as general. Also, do you think that we wear masks because of fear of rejection sometimes, or because the modern society it has made authenticity almost biologically unsafe, if I may say, because being authentic nowadays it gets you in trouble, and it is not the very trend of the society. So what do you think? What is this? Is this the fear, or is it something else?
Sure. I think that it's this fear of being judged, criticized, blamed, shamed, rejected, dismissed, ignored, neglected, abused. It pretty much is very, very fear based. And given the nature of just life and the challenges it presents personally, let alone all the different circumstances going on collectively, I think we would pretty much be in agreement that many people, more people than we would like to imagine, are sort of walking around in a dysregulated nervous system state where they're in a survival mode, the sympathetic nervous system, fight or flight, or even, freezing or fawning, people pleasing, just in an effort to get through the day. And I don't believe that we realize that in these states, unless we're aware and we have practices in place to be mindful of the changing nervous system states throughout the day, we're in this reactivity mode that's very fear-based. And in that fear-based space, we contract. We contract, we constrict. Our physiological functionings change. We're not really truly online with the executive functioning part of the brain, so to speak, and we're seeing through narrow lenses of threat, whether the threat is real or imagined, and we're ready to defend. So I think the masks, which can be helpful at times, and have served a purpose, otherwise they would not have formed. They create the illusion that we're safe, but they're also prohibiting the exploration to go within ourselves, or to really allow, the individual strengths, natural talents, attributes, abilities within ourselves to really shine through. And when we have mechanisms in place that allow us to ground through the breath, through the senses, somatically speaking, we feel open, we feel connected, where we feel more spacious. We have the capacity to use logic, to use reason, to tap into creativity, to find collaborative solutions, to problem solve, to see the bigger picture. And it's coming from a more loving, genuine place of trust, where a mask is not necessary, unlike living in a fear-based way where we're stuck in this survival mode, just perceiving threats that may not even be real, especially given, that the brain is truly not able to differentiate between something that's real or imagined. It could trigger the fight or flight, or freeze or fawn response.
That is a piercing insight for real. And to add on to it, protection, it can become performance sometimes. And thank you for that. Also, you left a corporate career to step into deeply embodied work. And many people, they crave that same alignment, but they fear the dismantling it requires, and they fear the drawbacks basically. So, how does one discern between the voice of intuition and the noise of escape when making such life altering choices? Can you take us through your path and, inspire us with that?
Sure, Pragya. Back at the time when this was all happening, I was very much disconnected from my core. I was wearing all types of masks, and I didn't realize that. I was very much caught up in my defenses, and part of that disconnect to self meant like disconnected from my body. I would just get up and do what needs to be done. I would force my way through until eventually, just systems broke down, and it was clear that something was unable to continue, but I wasn't quite sure what was next. because the disconnect that we feel when we wear these masks, unable to fully like tune into the core of who we are, it doesn't allow us to sense the information that the body is trying to convey through our emotional responses or experiences, or what's happening from a physiological perspective with different sensations that are alerting us to different things. And so it took a little while for me to just breathe again, and to begin to let my guard down. And at that point, I had met somebody who was sharing her experience in a master's program for mental health counseling. And for the first time, like, I felt a lightness about me, like a true lightness where my heart opened and my muscles released. And I just felt this sense of openness and possibility. So this is a, more of a my concrete story, more or less. But what we want to pay attention to is, what the workings of the mind are versus, what's happening within the soma, within the body, within us. And they're two very different um functionality, so to speak. And many of us, particularly here in Western society, in the US, I'm here in the Northeast, we spend a lot of time living in our heads, and the mind creates disturbances, and so oftentimes we need to sort of let the mind take a break and not do the mental time travel it does, whether it's going into the future or going into the past, and really using the breath, the oxygen to regulate, the autonomic nervous system so we can relax and be still in the present moment. And when we use the breath and we use the senses, we begin to tap into the body and into our experience from the perspective of almost like the witness observer or the experiencer of, without attaching to stories or attaching to projections or attaching to or identifying with a lot of the operations that happened in the mind.
Hmm, hmm, hmm. That is so true, so true. And I totally get the point wherein, there are certain life challenges that we face. And at that point, we realize that how many masks we have. And it's actually good to sometimes realize that well on time and, work for it and move towards the spiritual clarity. And that is so, so real because, sometimes what feels like falling apart is sometimes also our body's way of, reorganizing around truth and giving us the chance to, interpret and introspect what is happening around us. That is so, so great. Thank you for that.
Yes, yes.
Also, you mentioned somatics, and your work it emphasizes somatics a lot, which is the body as the keeper of truth. So, in psychological terms, we often process trauma very cognitively, right? But how does the body reveal what the mind represses, and how is that connected? Wherein a trauma is being represented by our body and there are signs. So what are those signs? And yes, how is that process and what is that process actually?
Well, from a clinical perspective, as a mental health counselor, I was very much heavy on the cognitive aspect, until my own life experiences led me to explore, more deeply into my own journey. And along the way, moving from more cognitive based strategies to mindfulness to neuroscience to trauma informs, I found it fascinating how when we have experiences in our lives that are so overwhelming that the nervous system is unable to process them, the experience fragments into many, many parts that get stored implicitly or unconsciously in the body. So for me, and according to the research and with regard to, working with clients, oftentimes we are not aware that this is happening, And that's the nature of trauma. It creates a disconnect from ourselves. And, there's this sense that something's wrong, and oftentimes it presents in maladaptive behaviors, whether it's anxiety or depression or addictions or compulsive behaviors or maladaptive behaviors. And, what I think the difficulty is that, we may self-diagnose or, Dr. Google or speak to others that sort of will compartmentalize these different things that are going on as if they're individual quote unquote disorders or diagnoses, when in fact there's something larger going on that's causing all these underlying aspects, if that makes any sense. So, another part of so to be able to really identify, if there's like, brain fog, difficulty getting out of the bed, difficulty sleeping, states of imbalances in the body, whether we're doing things excessively or deficiently, constant need to defend, difficulty in interpersonal relationships, a host of different physical or medical issues, whether it's autoimmune disease, other forms of heart disease, stroke, diabetes, chronic pain in the body. When we are disconnected from ourselves, and these fragmented parts don't have the opportunity to grow whole through the healing process, it really feels inside like something is wrong, and that feeling like there's something wrong with me is that very, very creepy feeling of shame, like it creeps in, and we may not know that we're experiencing this deep sense of like there's something wrong with me, and then we want to hide this and pretend that everything is okay, hence the mask. And so when we're disconnected from ourselves and wearing these masks, it prohibits us from authentically connecting to others. And that's the trauma in and of itself, because we are biologically wired to attach to one another. We need one another in healthy relationships to belong, to experience a sense of belonging, not to fit in, to pretend that thing, or to pretend to be, or to pretend whatever. Like, we need to be able to be ourselves and be held in regard, to be seen, to be understood, to be validated, to be appreciated, to be valued, for all of who we are and all of who we are not. And when we are not connected to ourselves, we can't show up in the world that way. So there's all these little aspects that can be very, very subtle yet profound at the same time, that we want to keep an eye out on, an eye out for. And it's tricky, sometimes it can be difficult to notice, but we know that we are we're more whole, or healing, or showing up more authentically, removing the mask, dropping these masks when there's an openness in the heart. There's a lightness. The body is fluid. It's flexible. It's flexible. There's less rigidity. There's an openness to new experiences. The capacity to trust in ourselves, to trust in others, to trust in the process. It's a different state of being, where we really can tap into ourselves, into our heart, and lead from this place of truth, which can only really be found at the core, underneath all of these different layers, in the forms of masks.
So true, so true. And it actually is something that, um it brings you back to yourself. And thank you for reframing that, because it feels so necessary at the point and at the phase that we live in. Also, when someone, they finally meet their core beneath conditioning, control, and coping, what shifts in the architecture of their life? You've been through that, and you've overcome all of these things, and you touched that. So how was it for you, and what is that one change or that shift in the architecture of your very life which happened, and it happens with other people too?
Well, I had one moment, and it wasn't really too long ago. Maybe it was a couple of years ago. And I was driving to work and I was turning into the parking lot of my office. And I was like, wow, like I noticed that my mind was clear. And the thoughts that were slowly moving through my mind were actually pleasant thoughts. And it hit me in that moment like I don't have like racing thoughts. I don't have worried thoughts. Like I have like really positive thoughts that are helpful and beneficial and are optimistic and inspiring. So that was a profound moment, and there's been many subtle moments after that where I can sense I get this like lump in my throat, almost like this joy, like I'm gonna like tears of joy building. And I just am so grateful that despite the difficulty or the discomfort we may have to go through in addressing these issues, and there's always support available somewhere, even through self-study, like it really makes a difference when we can just liberate ourselves, and live freely and authentically, but leading from the heart.
So true, so true. And that is actually such a timeless truth. And the shift is it's empowering and it's inspiring. So thank you for sharing that with us. Also, one last thing that I would like to know: how can one stay anchored there? When old survival patterns they resurface, especially in a world which constantly rewards the mask over the marrow. It is very obvious that the patterns they resurface. So what is that one thing which will keep you anchored, and which will let you know that no, this is not what you are, and there is a whole process that you have to go through for it? So what is that?
It is developing a consistent daily practice of some sort, in my opinion, whether that's breath work, just breathing, anything that falls under the realm of mindfulness, really coming into the present moment through the breath or through the senses. Any practice that allows the mind to just relax as we, tune back into the present moment and just spend consistently and repetitiously time there, because when we do this regularly, even if it's only for a few minutes each day, in some way that feels comfortable for us, and we can continue to explore and build upon the practices. But when we consistently and repetitiously show up each day, we rewire our neural circuitry, which allows us to cultivate a new baseline of safety, of calm, of trust. And so we shift away from the fear mindset into a new present reality that I'm okay and I am safe now. I'm safe to be me.
That is so beautiful. And what a luminous dialogue with Alicia today. She reminds us that unmasking is not rebellion; it's reunion. And beneath every layer of armor lives the original pulse of who we are, unedited, unashamed, and untamed. As you move through the noise of your own days, pause for a moment, feel your breath, notice what feels real, and that's your core calling you home. I am Pragya Malvia, and this is Divine Decode, where we journey beyond roles and routines to rediscover the truth encoded in our being. Until next time, live from the inside out, and I hope you take up insights that Alicia has given us today.